Some of you may have read the Heirs of the Medallion books, so these episodes will not be new to you. However, the way I'm going to tell them will not be as though I was reading the book. It will be, out of my memory of how the storyline runs, and there'll be different facts uh, and circumstances slightly different from what the written book says. The storyline will be, basically the same, but not as though I was reading it aloud. So the Inca people lived in what we now call Peru, and about 500 years ago, 5 to 700 years ago, was the height of their empire. They were incredible stonemasons. They worked with stone blocks. Go on a website and look at Machu Picchu, and you'll see, a city built very, very high up in the mountains, and no cement between the blocks that made the houses and stuff. They just fitted them together. They were absolutely incredible stoneworkers. They had 25,000 miles of roads in the empire at the height of the empire. And the roads were all made of stones, fit perfectly together. I don't know how wide the roads were, but they were really, really good roads, uh, covering 25,000 miles of the empire. They did not have horses and cattle. They used llamas for their pack animals. So the roads were pretty interesting because when the road would go along a flat place, that was great. But when it came to a hill or a mountain, the road did not zigzag up the mountain the way roads in Europe did to make it easy for horses or oxen or whatever animal with pulling wagons to go up the hill. They Inca people made stone staircases going straight up the hill and straight down the other side because llamas perfectly well could execute those roads. They didn't need curves back and forth along the face of a hill. So there were like stone staircases going straight up and straight down. Let's see, other details which are interesting is the Incas used, bows and arrows and spears and clubs and so on, but their preferred weapon was a sling, a 5-foot sling. And they were absolutely deadly accurate with the sling. We read in ancient writings that people could split a human hair at 20 or 30 yards with a rock thrown by a sling. And when you practice constantly through your whole life, that accuracy becomes absolutely realistic. The other thing is that the sling would project or throw a rock at about 100 miles an hour. Now, I made a sling when I started researching these books and practiced with it, and it's hard. It's hard to throw the rock. I mean, it takes a lot of practice. I finally had to put a yo-yo type loop on one of the strands because in the beginning I'd forget. You whirl the sling around your head and you let go of one strand, and that releases the rock. Well, about half the time I'd forget and let go both strands, and the whole bloody sling would fly off through the air. So I had to put a yo-yo type knot on my finger to make sure one string was attached to me. The other thing is, my rocks in the very beginning, they'd go straight up in the air. They go straight down. They'd go to the right or left. They went nowhere in the line that I wanted them to go. Now, as I practiced, I got better and better at that. I never got the up and down trajectory um, really handled. I finally got the release point, which was just about my right shoulder was the release point. That I got down pretty well, but the up and down trajectory was really, really hard. Half the time I'd throw them right in the dirt or a little ways out in the dirt, or the rest of the time they'd fly over my target. Um, when I first told this story as a story, these books as a story, 10 years ago, all the kids in the summer school where I was telling it went out and made slings, and the headmaster from the summer school had to forbid them from using the slings around the school because, you know, that rock can break a window in a heartbeat. And you're not that good until you've practiced hours and hours and hours. So the headmaster of the summer school had to forbid them all from using their slings around the school. Anyway, um, the other thing that the Inca were incredible weavers of fiber and hairs and grass. They made um, bridges that spanned great canyons out of grass, woven grass, uh, big, what would you call them? Hawser, like big ropes, big, thick ropes of woven grass that would support a suspension bridge over a big canyon. They also made boats out of grass, tightly woven boats. There's a story that an English sailing ship around the time of this story, about 1500 or in that era, found an Inca uh, ship, grass ship, 500 miles offshore with a crew of about 20 on board. So they had some amazing skills. And one of the ways that they used their weaving skills was to make cloth armor. Now, for the purposes, historically, the cloth armor was pretty thick. I don't know how thick, but it was pretty thick, like a parka, something like that. But it could take a sword blow or a spear thrust and protect the person wearing it. And in fact, the conquistadors, after battles, the Spanish conquistadors, who were the invaders, would take the cloth armor off the dead Inca warriors and use it themselves instead of their steel armor because they could fight so much more easily than heavy steel armor around their waist or legs if they wore leg armor. The cloth armor was infinitely better to fight in. And so the Spanish invaders adapted that. Now, for purposes of my books, I use what would you call it? Creative imagination, and I make the cloth armor thinner. If you read the books, you'll see thinner. That's my prerogative as a writer to make it work the way I want it to work for the books, because the books take place both modern times and ancient times. And for the modern times, particularly, I wanted that cloth armor to be quite thin. In fact, it was bulky in reality, but in my stories, it's thin. I'm trying to think of any other details before I start episode one. Um, they lived, a lot of the Inca cities were at high altitude, at quite high altitude. Um, and I think that's about the details I want to give you as I start episode one. Oh, no, I'll give you the background. In 1520, the Spanish conquistadors under Pizarro, the leader Pizarro, attacked the Inca Empire and subdued in time, over years, subdued the Inca Empire. Oh, there's some other facts that would be good on this too. Uh, the Spanish wanted the gold. The Inca people were really, really good workers of gold. They did not value gold for money. They valued gold for making a person important, showing to others that that person was important who had gold. And one of the ways they did that was to refine the gold into sheets, into very, very thin, thin sheets, and put it on their houses. The rich people put it on their houses. Well, what would that do? Well, when the sun came up, it would reflect, right, off the house, and the house would shine, and everyone would know there was a really, really important person or family living in that house. Now, what's interesting about this is that at this time, roughly around 1500, the Europeans did not have a way to refine the gold that well so that it was a shiny surface. The Inca people did. Pretty interesting. But the Spanish invaders wanted the gold for riches. The Inca people didn't really care that much about it except as an expression of importance. So Pizarro captured the emperor and held him prisoner. And Pizarro told him, if you will fill a room with gold, I will release you. Now, I don't know, and my research doesn't show how big that room was, but let's suppose it was a fairly big room, the size of a classroom or better. So Pizarro demanded a room of gold, and the emperor sent out messengers around the country to bring in the gold. Well, they filled the room with gold, just as Pizarro had demanded. And what happened was that Pizarro then killed the emperor in front of his family, his wife, and his kids, however many kids he had, killed them. Well, that set in motion a situation of ongoing war with the Inca people. This story starts in 1540, 20 years after the emperor was killed. So high up on a lookout spot on a mountain, an Inca warrior spots about 30 Spanish soldiers on horses coming up a twisting, narrow canyon that led to the hidden city of Patiti. Now, Patiti was a city built by the Inca people, and it was very, very high up in the mountains, probably 10,000 feet up in the mountains, surrounded by mountains, and it was in a little valley. There was one road in, there had been one road in up this narrow valley that the riders were coming. But it had been taken out years and years and years before by the emperor's right-hand man, an Inca noble named Kist. And Kist had escaped, after the emperor had been killed, Kist had escaped from the conquistadors with his family and come to this city. And the first thing he did, because he was an important guy, the first thing he did was order that road to be taken out, and the whole valley that road came up disguised as best as possible to show that there had never been a road there. They were so successful at that disguise that the city of Petite was never discovered, although the Spanish looked for it and looked for it and looked for it. The city was never discovered for 20 years. And finally, one day, this patrol it kind of started following this valley, didn't see anything to follow, but just followed this valley and stumbled onto the city. Well, the lookout had enough time to warn the city. And the city was all made of stone houses, some 2 stories high, maybe even 3 stories high. And there was a big central square. And all the women and children got hidden. And the warriors assembled, and the Spanish rode into the square to be attacked by the warriors. And this big battle ensued. And the Inca warriors had mostly just like a vest of cloth armor, no pants, nothing on their arms, because they wanted to be, and sandals on their feet. They wanted to be free to fight. Some of the Spanish were in armor, chest armor, a few helmets. They had lances and swords, and this terrific battle went on. And as the battle went on, there was an older man who suddenly took a sword blow to his neck, right on the corner of his neck. And the sword went in deeply, and he was severely wounded and fell and was dragged away by a younger warrior, away from the battle to the back of the Inca fighters. And the older man lay on the street, and the younger man was his son, Adzul. The older man was Kist, former right-hand man to the emperor. And Adzul bent over him, and Kist said, "You've got to get out of the empire. You've got to flee the empire." And he reached under his cloth armor and pulled out a leather strap. And Adzul helped pull the leather strap off Kist's head. And attached to the leather strap, was a silver medallion, a round silver medallion with a square hole in it. It was about 3.5 inches across, with a square hole in the middle. And Kist said, "Take this medallion and get it out of the empire. You must not let the conquistadors get it. It possesses a great secret. Someday the secret will be uncovered. You must keep it in the family and pass the medallion down from one generation to another. When you get very, very old and are near to death, you are to give the medallion to the youngest member of the family that you have. And they will wear it for their lives and give it to the youngest member of their family when they die." And his eyes shut. And Adzul thought he was dead. But then his eyes fluttered open, and he said, "You must teach every member of your family how to weave the cloth armor, and you must teach them how to use the sling. They are to pass on those skills to their families and to their families until the secret of the medallion is discovered." And Adzul said, "I will." And Keith's eyes closed again, and Adzul thought he was dead. And then his eyes fluttered open, and he said, "Go, now, get away." And his head slumped to the side, and he died. Adzul stood up and looked over the battle scene, and it was still raging on. He was at the back of the battle. And one of the warriors yelled at him to, sorry about the dog, one of the warriors yelled at him to get away. He said, "Your father was an important man. He told us that if he was killed, you have to leave the empire. Get out of here. Go, run." And Adzul said, "I will," but his eyes kept looking around the battle, and he spotted the captain of the Spanish troops. Now the captain had a thin face and a narrow kind of pointy beard, and he had a helmet that came down just over the top of his head, just came down above his ears, and he had mean eyes, and he was swinging his sword and chopping at people. Adzul put a rock in his sling and loaded the sling, and he loaded the sling with a rock and swung it around his head. 5 revolutions. That put full force on the release of the rock. And at that moment, the captain looked out over the battle, and he saw this warrior standing at the back of the battle swinging a sling. And he saw him release the sling, and the next thing the captain knew, his cheek was grazed by a rock, and his left ear was torn completely off his head. And he screamed and clapped his hand up to his ear, and blood was pouring out of where the earlobe had been. And he just had his hand up to his ear when another rock grazed his other cheek, and his other ear was torn off. And he had both hands over his ears, blood pouring out, and he looked at the warrior at the back of the battle, and the warrior smiled, gave him a big smile, and turned and ran. The captain said, "Get that man!" And some soldiers on horses broke away from the battle. Now, Adzul took off down the street, and the streets of the city, the big streets, were quite wide, paved with stone, very smooth, and he ran. He was about 5'6". He was 20 years old, roughly 20 years old. He had a headband. He had long black hair going down to his shoulders. He had his armor vest on, and he had a loincloth and bare legs and sandals. And he ran, and he was very strong, although he was slender. Now, the Inca people were great runners, and so he ran down the street, and he was thinking about his situation as he ran down the street. This was late spring our time, but the beginning of winter their time. And he knew it was going to be cold. He didn't have any heavy clothing. They'd all stripped for the battle. And he had no food. He knew he had to get out of the city, and there was only one way out of the city. And that was a path to the north for the traders to go, which is what they actually did, is to go from the Inca Empire up through the northern part of South America, through Central America, and into what today is North America we call the United States. because there was trade going on. We now know there was trade going on between North America and South America all through the centuries. We didn't really understand that, but now discoveries have shown that there was active trade going on. And out of Patiti was this one trail to the north, and it went up a um, steep ridge on the north side of the city, over the ridge and on through the hills and valleys, through the mountains to the north. So Adzul's running, he's sprinting, and he's thinking about these things, thinking about he had no clothes, no food, and maybe he could duck into a house and get something when around the corner behind him, he hears horses running. And he looks back, and there's 7 conquistadors on horses coming after him, and at full speed, because the captain had said there's gold for any man who captures that warrior. And so Adzul, obviously the horses could run a lot faster than Adzul, so they were gaining on him every step. And he waited until they were, maybe 10, 15 yards behind him, and then he ducks like a shot down a narrow side alley to the right. And the alley is maybe 2 people, 3 people wide, much, 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 much narrower than the big main street. And the soldiers tried to crowd their horses in there, all to get after him, because the first one to get him is the one who's going to get the gold. And they're fighting to get into the alley. And while they're fighting to get into the alley, he's sprinting down the alley, comes to a left turn, alley to the left, turns left, sprints down that. And by now, the soldiers are kind of single file racing after him, and he takes them twisting and turning, but they still are coming pretty fast. Fortunately, on one right-hand turn to another alley, the leader's horse falls, and there's a huge commotion as they all wait for the leader to get his horse. He's just the leading soldier, get his horse up, get on the horse, and come after him. And Adzul gains precious time. And he emerges out of the city on the fields to the east. To his right is the steep ridge with the trader route going up it. And over the ridge, because of course the traders used llama, was a staircase road. And Adzul sprints for the staircase. And as it's probably 200 yards away. He gets about 100 yards away, maybe 125 yards away, when the horses come out of the last alley and are after him. And the riders are spurring their horses and whipping him with their reins and coming after him. And the horses are fast. And Adzul runs as fast as he can, and he gets to the bottom of the staircase and starts up it. 2 stairs at a time, starts up it. And the riders are coming and coming, and he gets maybe 30, 40 yards up the staircase, and one of the riders fires a blunderbuss at him. And a blunderbuss was a very crude kind of a rifle. The Inca were never afraid of the blunderbusses because the Spanish never hit anybody. And the Inca thought they were just noisemakers to scare people. But in fact, of course, they weren't. And by great luck, the shot from the blunderbuss hits Adzul. It grazes him on his right thigh, and he goes down. And he looks down at his right thigh, and it's bleeding, but he can see that the wound is just It's just across. It's just across the skin, a little bit in, maybe half an inch deep in his thigh, and it's bleeding like crazy all over his leg. But it's not fatal. It's not. It doesn't disable him. Besides, his adrenaline is going like crazy, and he jumps up and keeps running. Well, the Spanish hit the staircase, and their horses are slipping and sliding on the stairs. And a couple of them ride their horses off to the side on the dirt to the side of to the right side of the stairs, but the hill is so steep that actually the guys with all the trouble of getting their horses up the stairs are going up the stairs faster than the guys on the dirt who don't have to worry about the horses on steps. Adzul sprints halfway up the hill, and halfway up the hill is a flattened part that had been dug out and flattened in the hillside. And right at the head of the stairs is an enormous boulder about 8 feet tall. And it is right at the edge of the stairs, and at the bottom of it is a stone block, a stone wedge under the boulder. It's round. The boulder is completely round, right at the top of the stairs, because through the 20 years of war, the Inca had learned that the Spanish horses were not good on the stairs, and they learned to roll rocks down on them and catch them on the stairs. And there's a big wooden mallet, like a big sledgehammer, right there. And Adzul grabs the hammer and knocks the rock wedge out from the bottom of the boulder. And then he runs around to the back of the boulder and puts his back against it and pushes as hard as he can. Sweat breaks out on him. He pushes. Normally it takes 2 to 3 men to start one of these boulders rolling down the hill. And he pushes and pushes. And with every ounce of strength, he feels the rock start to move, the boulder, and it starts to roll. And down the staircase it goes, bounding and bouncing and crashing down the staircase, while all the horsemen on the staircase see it coming because it's making a big noise. And 2 of them go off the stairs to the dirt hillside on the left of the stairs, and 5 of them go off the stairs to the right. And just before the big boulder gets to them, it bounces on a stair, bounces clear over their heads and on down the hill. And they watch it go, and then they turn around and shake their fists and yell, kind of like, "Yeah, you can't get us," and start up. But while they've been watching the big boulder go down the rest of the hill, Adzul has loosed a second smaller boulder that was set to come down on the left side, on the grass on the left side of the stairs. And it was quiet because it was on the grass and dirt. It came down like a freight train. And the 2 soldiers on the left turned from watching the big boulder go down the hill, turned to look up the hill. Their horses shied. Their horses saw what was coming and pulled out of their hands and stampeded away across the hillside. And the second boulder hit those 2 conquistadors full on and killed both of them instantly and went on down the hill. The rest of the soldiers screamed and looked up, and here comes yet a 3rd boulder down on the right side, and they scramble and get out of the way just in time. After Adzul released the 3rd boulder, he turned and ran across the flat part of the hill that had been leveled out, and then started up the staircase on the rest of the steep. The flat place with the boulders was about halfway up the ridge, and he started up the staircase. And sore leg, he didn't pay any attention. He went up 2 steps at a time because he knew that when the soldiers got their horses to the top of the ridge and started down, they'd be much faster than he. And so he reached the top of the ridge and started down 2 steps at a time. By some miracle, he didn't fall. And he got down the stairs on the far side, and the trail going away to the north took a bend about 100 yards away from the bottom of the hill, took a bend to the left around the side of a ridge, and then straightened out. And where it bent around the side of the ridge, he would be hidden, and he sprinted for that place. Now, on either side were grass-covered hillsides, no cover, no bushes, no trees, no nothing. It was over 10,000 feet high, just pure grassy slopes, nowhere to hide. He sprinted for that bend in the road, and as he got almost to the bend, he heard the Spanish reach the bottom of the staircase, and he heard the pounding of hooves as they were coming after him. He dashed around the corner out of sight and started stripping off. There was nowhere to hide. Started stripping off his armor shirt. He wasn't going to let himself be taken alive. He knew what they would do to him if they caught him. He heard the horses coming. That's where we're going to end the episode for today. Now, those of you who know this story know what happens, but those of you who don't know this story, you might try your hand at imagining what happens next as a writing exercise. Have a hand at that, see what you think, and tomorrow you'll find out what Mr. Sage's solution is. See you tomorrow.